Hi, I'm Kelly at Book and Paper Arts, and from time to time I am asked if I have any ideas about what to do with paper scraps that are left over from other projects, bookmaking projects, or what you will. And the answer is yes. Yes, I do. So today I'm going to show how to make little tiny journals out of paper scraps. I'm going to show how to make a mini journal using a concertina fold. That's an accordion fold. And then one showing how to make a book with mixed papers with a sewn binding. That's going to be today, part 1. Tomorrow, part 2, I'm going to talk about how to work in these little baby books and fill them up and decorate your pages using scraps. I'm willing to bet the farm that you also have a stash of paper scraps and are wondering, looking for ways to use them up and make them into something meaningful. Perhaps like a mini journal. It's a funny thing about me and scraps because in real life I am minimalist. I do not hoard anything. But paper is different. And in my time creating, these papers have been very, very good to me. And somehow I just can't see them as rubbish. And I just have this feeling that they can be turned, they still have stories, and they can be turned into something beautiful that can then be cherished and have a new life. So please join me as we go make those journals. If you like journal arts, if you like book and paper arts, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure and turn on the notifications with that little bell. That way you will have more of them in your life. Let's go play with scraps. The basic pages in today's journals are going to be made from these scraps, which are offcuts. They're strips of paper. And that's because I've been making a lot of handmade art journals lately. And while these have mixed papers in them, the basic paper is a heavy watercolor paper that I then dye. Now, this paper, as I to make these the right size, I then had to tear off a couple of inches at the bottom, hence the strips. And I wasn't going to throw them away because, as I said, this is good paper. I was thinking of making these into bookmarks, and I may. But then I was also thinking, wouldn't that make the perfect 2x2 or 1.5x2 mini journal with a kind of a landscape format? And I suspect that we can get more in these pages than you think you can, especially when we start decorating with scraps. I also have to bind into the Sewn book. I've got, these are vintage handwritten pages, and it's the same thing. These were offcuts because I put handwritten paper in my boiled books. See, this is an echo print. This is from a recent video here on YouTube about mark making on paper napkins. And look, I think we can, so needless to say, I ended up with a shoebox full of these. And now I'm thinking I can tear that and bind that into a book. Look at this. This is from a video that never made it to YouTube, even though I spent a day and a half experimenting with it. It didn't work. I wanted to see if I could do faux shibori dyeing, but instead of using indigo and rice paper, I wanted to use coffee and watercolor paper. And you know what? You can't. Not very well, anyway. But it was a gorgeous failure. So I kept it. And now I'm thinking, look, that's gonna make a nice little page to bind into the book right there. If you do not have off-cut strippy scraps like this, make your own. Take whatever paper you've got. Watercolor paper, sketching paper, copier paper, or even note paper. Use what you got and make yourself some strips. Mine, I think it's about 2 by 2, but you go with what feels good in your hand, and let's get started. Let's start by making a mini journal with a concertina or accordion fold. I'm making mine in a kind of a landscape, which is a little longer than it is wide. And but you can make yours square or portrait or whatever feels good in your hand for your own work. This is 2 inches by 1.5, which is 5 centimeters by 4 centimeters. And I have made a little template, otherwise known as a piece of paper. And I'm going to go on my strip and just take that little piece of paper template all the way, marking off where my fold is going to be. And here we got a little bit of a, we don't want that, so we're going to trim that off. I've marked off 3 strips, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 15 folds. I may add more. We'll see when we get there. So what you want to do for your fold, your concertina fold, is fold on that edge that you've marked off. And I'm using a bone folder. You can use a straight edge, whatever you got. And then just start fan folding it like this. Back in on itself, and then back in on itself as though you were making a fan. And what you want to do is, as you make each fold, make sure that it's nice and crisp. And then just continue with all of your strips. Now to put our strips together so we have one long strip of scraps. To do that, take 2 ends of your folded paper. Here's one, here's another, and put them together so they meet there. And then we're going to assemble that and put it together with a hinge. In this case, I am going to hinge them together here using washi tape. You can also use masking tape or clear tape, or just take a glue stick and a piece of thin paper and make your own. I've cut this to the 2-inch size of the paper strip, and because washi tape looks good but doesn't always hold very well, I'm adding a little extra glue there because we do need this hinge to hold. So I'm going to put half of it down on this one, and then add the next page, the next strip page, to the hinge. And I don't know what made me think that was 2 inches. All right, so we'll just trim it. Problem solved. Now our strips are going to be held together, and we're going to have a long strip. I'm going to add an extra hinge on the back here just to make sure that it's got some staying power. So do what you think you need to do to make it nice and robust. And so now, got a longer strip. I'm going to add that one here with another hinge. Now I have my accordion book. I am crazy about that. I want to add a cover. And the cover is where you can start getting really creative with your scraps. I thought about using this scrap of Echo print. That would make a good cover. You could use a page from a magazine, cardstock, watercolor paper, or something from a greeting card. Just anything that's pretty that will make a cover. I'm not going to bind this like a bound cover. I'm just going to put a piece here, a piece here. So what I'm going to try is this piece of packing cardboard. It came in something I bought. I can't remember what. And which is great because not only is it a scrap, but it's reusing stuff in an even different way. And that makes me happy. So I've got this scrap of cardboard. And now I'm going to add leave just a little bit of border. And I'm going to draw that in so I can see where there's just maybe just like a millimeter there around every edge of my pages. This is a deliberately messy book, so don't worry if it's off or wonky. Lean into it. Now I have my cardboard squares that I have rough torn, one for either end. And I'm using a glue stick today, and you can use a matte medium, you can use PVA, craft glue, whatever you got, but I'm just using, when I'm using thin paper like this, I am happy with a glue stick. Which means it's also something that I can do if I'm on the road and I want to make some journals at a coffee table or whatnot. Okay, so I've got that down there. And now I have my accordion journal made out of scraps. I'm pretty sure I'm going to add a wrap to this with some ribbon or sari silk. But first I want to decorate the cover just a little bit. Let's see. I have some ink here. This is fountain pen ink. I'm going to put some in a pipette and drizzle. You know what? I'm going to do it this way. Start at the top and add this heavy ink, and then I'm going to activate it with some water. And you know what else? I'm going to try a little bit of this. This is some gesso that I've thinned out with some water. Let's just do, ooh, yeah. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, I'm going to twirl that around and let it dry, and we'll look at the end result in a bit. For the next section, I'm going to talk about how I made the pages for this journal that's going to have a sewn binding. Again, I just took my strips, and I knew that I wanted my pages to be, you know, about like that, 2 by 2-ish. And again, I just drew those off on the strip rather than measuring 100,000 times. and then I cut. So I've got that template, and I can just use that over and over in these different mixed papers. And fold that, and I've got a page. This piece was left over. It's quite a bit shorter. But you know what? I might use it anyway. And that way I'm going to have this is a messy journal, and then I'm going to have a variety of sizes and shapes of mixed papers. I can bind it in anyway. It's all about using scraps today. These came from when I made an altered book, and I had to tear out pages from my altered book. Well, I certainly wasn't going to throw the text away. So now I can use it. I've just trimmed it down to these bits and bobs here. I've got some of the handwritten paper, some of that coffee dyed paper that didn't work as a video but made some nice scraps. This is some stiffened stiffened napkins that I did in my last video. So if you'd like to see how those got made, check out my last video, the one before this one. So now we're getting a mix of different papers for this art journal. I'm not sure how many pages I'm going to put in. I'll figure that out in a bit. This is from a magazine, coffee book page. It looks something like this. And I took some sandpaper and I just buffed out the gloss. So now it looks a little bit aged, but still has the pattern and the colors. It's almost abstract now. I buffed out the words on the other side and then softened it with some ink drizzles, which I then blotted with this piece of plain paper, and now, look, that's gonna look so pretty good. So I am just going to assemble these different mixed papers, scraps. I'm going to add some of this stiffened gauze as a kind of a page here, an element anyway. And I don't have a good systematic way to make my gauze fit. So I'm going to just kind of guess here, holding it in place and then cutting around it, sort of. Please let your books be messy. Well, I don't know. Some people might really like a tidy book. You could do that too. If you'd like to know how to make stiffened gauze, that's also in last week's video. I was using paste to make napkins and gauze and other things into a little bit stiffened so that you can use it as an element here. And so now I'm going to be able to add that in to my signatures. And that's coming along nicely. Now I have my signatures. I've made 3 signatures and they've got 8 little baby pages in each one. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 16 pages altogether when it's folded, and that makes 32 sides. So you actually have quite a lot of pages here to work on, a lot more than it looks like. I have to sew these into a cover. That's what's going to hold us together. And you can make this out of anything. You can make it out of cardstock or scrapbook, paper, this watercolor paper. This is a bit of stiffened napkin, and I think that would look really nice. Again, I made these in last week's video. That's what this is also. That would look good. Let's see. Here's some scrap of handwritten paper. Could use that for a cover if I trimmed that. But what I'm going to use today is this piece of paper. This is it's watercolor paper, and it's a scrap in the sense that I was making this art journal into a boiled book. And that's where I take plants and sometimes rust, and then I boil them in a tea bath and turn them into art journals. But for some reason, this book, I had this whole thing, and it did not want to work. It did not want to become a book. And I tried binding it 4 times, and 4 times I failed. So I finally listened to the paper and said, great, I'll turn it into something else. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take this apart, trim it, and use it for the cover for this, and then, you guessed it, I'll have some scraps. It's a vicious circle. To measure for the cover, again, this is a super messy freestyle. So normally you would measure within an inch of your life if you're binding a book, but not today. So I knew that I wanted to capture and use this part with the rust, because that's where the drama is. So I've got my 3 signatures, and I'm pulling them close to the end here. But I am leaving like a little 1/4 of an inch or a millimeter on the top, over here, and I will be doing it on the bottom as well. Now, there's about almost an inch, 3/4 of an inch there, so I need to build that in. So there and there. It's pretty inexact. And so now I'm going to rough tear that, and we'll start putting it together. I changed my mind. I'm not going to have 3 signatures, I'm going to have 1. So I just took all of those 3 separate signatures and nestled them into 1. And then I've got the cover right there. Now what I'm going to do is I've drawn off where my holes are going to go for my stitching. 3 holes. I just blah 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 is about 5 centimeters, so this is 2.5, 1 and 1. Da, 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 da. But you know, on something like this, don't get too precious about it. It doesn't matter if it's a smidgen off. I've got my old dictionary, and I've got a bookmaker's awl, but you could also use a needle or a push pin. If you would like to see more about instructions on how to make a 3-hole pamphlet stitch journal, I have so many of them already here on YouTube, and I'm linking to them in the text box below. So I am kind of going through this part pretty quick. But the least amount you need to know is that you've got put holes all the way through all of your pages, and that's going to be where you sew your stitches. To sew it together, I'm using embroidery thread, but you could use a lot of different things. You could use any kind of a heavy thread that you have. Dental floss works well. Again, if you aren't sure, please check out my previous videos, which I've linked to, that will show you in way more detail about the best way to get yourself situated for this stitch, but it's really not hard. 1, 2, so that's enough right there for the sewing, but I sometimes guess wrong, so I'm going to go with 3 lengths of thread, and that's how much we're going to need to sew. I'm coming in from the outside, so my little threads will end up on the outside of the cover. I'm stitching through this first, the middle hole, and go up to the top. In, pull it nice and tight, and then go all the way down to the bottom. And I'm gonna have to squiggle with these a little bit, and that is normal. So don't worry if you have to go through a few pages at a time. Okay, so now we've come up through hole number 3. Oh, bother. Ta-da! Now, let's see, pull this very, very tight, especially since you've got so many papers. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then go back through the middle hole, right there. Pull tight and add a knot on the outside. I said a knot, but in fact, I tend to add a bow rather than a knot, because in my experience, these pages will loosen, especially when you have a super thick single signature. So this way, if you just tie this bow, if the pages start to loosen, you can just untie it, tighten them back up, and make another bow. And then we have a little messy book made of scraps. And there you go. 2 adorable little mini journals made from scraps. This is the one with the concertina fold or the accordion fold. I can't tell if I'm going to do it this way or this way. We're going to find out tomorrow. And then there's the little baby book with the sewn binding and the mixed pages. Please join me tomorrow because I'm going to start filling these books up using scraps. So I've got some ideas for that. Stay tuned. We will be working in the little books. If you have any feedback or any questions, please let me know in the comments below. I love to compare notes. By the way, if you would like to know how to make boiled pages in a boiled book, I do have an online class just about that. And I'm going to link to that in the text box below if you'd like to see how to make your own boiled papers. Until tomorrow, happy making.